Hello and welcome to the Band of One podcast. I am Brian Wilson, and this podcast is designed for anybody that wants to start, develop, or grow an existing solo or small group performing career. Maybe as a performer, maybe as a teacher, maybe as a writer. But the idea here is to give you actionable tools that you can use to start wherever you are and make more money and have fun and enjoy the process. If you like what we do, be sure and subscribe and share this with other people. Let's get busy.
Guitar Made Simpler, an intelligent approach, is the first all-new guitar method in years. Riley Wilson, veteran guitar teacher, writer, and performer, has taught this same material successfully to thousands of students since 1987. This logical approach will help anyone begin mastering the world's most popular instrument. A combination of formal notation with guitar tablature and included MP3 disc guarantee your success. Online video by the author demonstrating performing examples slowly and correctly. Start making real progress on the guitar. Order your copy today at guitarmadesimpler.com.
Today I have a guest that I've been excited about having on for an extended period of time because he's one of my mentors, and I'm not sure I ever really told him why that was. Please welcome the great Les Wise.
Thank you very much. I sure appreciate it.
I'm delighted to do this. Les was one of my, for those of you that don't know who Les is, Les was one of the premier instructors back at the Guitar Institute of Technology, which then became Musicians Institute in 1984, halfway through my year there. And Les was a huge impact on me. He's been an impact on thousands of players. He's got almost a dozen books that he's done, The Home of the Deliberate Musician. We'll get into all of that in a little bit. But Les, let's begin at the beginning. Where did the Les Wise story begin? I know you spent some time in Louisiana. I'm originally from Shreveport, but where did the Les Wise story begin?
Well, I guess in New Orleans, and and grew up playing when I was really young, and met a couple of musicians when I was like in junior high school. They wanted to form a band, and then there was a guy named Roger Filiberto, and he wrote the first electric bass methods for Melbay. And he was good friends with Melbay. But in any case, he was my teacher and taught me how to read when I was 12, 13 years old. And
Wow.
then I just started, I just played and played more. And, New Orleans you're from Shreveport, but New Orleans is a lot of gigs, And so you can make a living your whole life doing that. So when I was younger, I started playing more gigs and more gigs and there's just so many musicians to play with. And then when I was in my 20s, early 20s, Roger Filiberto, he had been teaching since like 1938. So he's almost
Wow.
you could look at him. He's more like he doesn't play seven string, but he's like George Van Epps ish, right? Like he had
Yes.
all these orchestras in New Orleans, and he had been doing all kinds of stuff. So in any case, he wanted to sell his music studio. So he had a music studio where he taught students, but he had been teaching the great grandparents, the grandparents, the parents, and the kids for so long that so as far as the actual value of the business, it had been a long time. So myself and his daughter had married this guy named Hank Mackey, who's from New Orleans, right? And so Hank and I bought the studio together, and then we had two other teachers, and we taught everybody, And Hank had a student, Steve Mezikowski, who went to Berkeley, and when he came back, he had a girlfriend named Emily Rimler, the guitar player, and so then Emily comes back to New Orleans, but in any case, it's a long heritage of teaching. There's thousands of students over time. I think whatever, it was just incredible experience. So in case I did that, and then I just, in New Orleans, there's a lot of horn players that, that not only the brass players and the other players that are there, like saxophone and trumpet, it goes on and on. And so in any case, there's just tons of gigs and Mardi Gras and so I did all of that stuff, and I played in the theater, and I played in the hotels, and so it gave me a lot of experience. But the thing I'll mention, getting to your point about the GIT and all. So what happens when I was 17, I think 17 or so. So I meet a guitar player from Houma, Louisiana. So so he was
Was
from
his
Houma.
name Ronnie Echte?
Right, exactly. So I meet Ronnie, and we've been best friends forever, right? And so Ronnie, so Ronnie and I hang out together and become friends and all that kind of stuff. And then Ronnie and I'd be playing on Bourbon Street. Uh, uh, well, we would be playing like 5 or 6 nights. I think it's mostly 5 nights a week in New Orleans, but we'd be playing, and then we would have, and I was playing in one club, and he was playing in another. And then when we would finish the gig, when I say finish the gig, we would play from like 7 to 2 in the morning. We had 1 hour off. This is on Saturday, and then we played till like 5 or 6 in the morning when the sun came up. And so then we would go. We would go to his mother's house in Houma, Louisiana, and so we would go down there, and so we became. Yeah, it just became a great thing. An interesting thing because another guitar player that I only met that went to GIT, but I only met him about 6 months ago, but named Shane Terrio.
Yes.
Terrio is from Thibodeau. So you
Yep.
have Houma, you have Thibodeau, and you have New Orleans, and so him and I have become friends. But basically he's from that Thibodeau area, and so yeah, it's just the same case. What I'm saying though, all of this started by playing in New Orleans, and when I say playing it all the time, forever, and gigs where you'd start one gig, well, there'd be drummers. I mean, give you an example. On Bourbon Street, there'd be musicians I would meet, right? When I was younger too. And they've been playing 6 nights a week for like 16 years in a band. And so they put their kids through college and all that. So yeah, so New Orleans was definitely play heavy, tons of, musicians. And early on, I had, and all the gigs we play, I would play with Ellis Marcellus, with his Wynton Marcellus's father. Okay. And so, and I remember
Isn't that an interesting family, Wes? They're just. In fact, I want to pause for just a split second because you and I grew up in an era where you really could. If you wanted to play 7 nights a week, you could. And in your case, if you wanted to play 2 or 3 gigs in one day until you literally fell over, you could. That doesn't exist as much anymore. But do you realize how fortunate, at least I feel like I was very fortunate to grow up in an era to be able to do that.
yeah, you're totally
When
right.
I came to GIT in March of '83, I had worked a gig with a road band that was playing hotels, playing 300 plus nights a year for 2 years in a row. Came off the road, got a
Yeah.
country western house band gig in Raleigh that was 6 nights that went to 5 nights a week. Took 2 weeks off basically to propose to my wife in Houston, drive to Los Angeles, find the apartment, and start classes April 1st of 1983. So that was the norm for you and I.
Normal. Yep.
And I think the other thing too, I don't know what it is about the water in Louisiana or what it is, but there have been some monster players from the state, the Pelican State.
Yeah. Oh no, there's monster players too, and a lot of them don't want to ever leave. In New
That's
Orleans,
true.
great musicians that never left. They never wanted to leave, and they
Louisiana is its own thing. We're in Frisco, Texas, about 30 miles north of Dallas, and we've got some
no,
dear
yeah, for
friends.
Orlando,
Yeah,
Frisco, that's Dallas
yeah,
country.
absolutely. We got
Cowboys.
some dear neighbors that we've known for ever since we moved into this house 25 years ago. They're from New Orleans.
Yeah,
And they're getting on in age, but we have to look in on them. And they're really sweet people. And as I said, they actually made the move out of Louisiana, but there are I've got cousins in my family on my mom's side of the family that will never leave there.
yeah.
And so I completely get that. Les, I did want to ask you one question because one of the things that you did and that you have is you have an amazing sense of being able to teach people and communicate difficult things to them.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about pedagogy for a moment because that's something almost nobody talks about in relation. Guitar and pedagogy, you'll almost never hear at the same time. But and a little background about this. Our class that started in April of 1983 was the first class at the Guitar Institute, which became MI, that actually had video instruction.
You did.
And so what that meant is people like Les and people like Charlie Fechter or Danny Gilbert or Eric Pascal or Don Mock and Ronnie Eschate, all of these people would sit down in front of a camera and do a video lesson we would then watch and then go to class and go over that.
Yeah.
One of the things that you did that astounded me, and I knew you knew what you were doing, which is why I wanted to address this. I'm tickled to have this on videotape, is that you would say, okay, this 251, Charlie Parker might approach it like this. Okay, Coltrane might approach it like this. And he said, and you would say something like, which is better? Think about that.
Yeah.
The camera would go dark for about 10 seconds, and we're sitting there pondering, Coltrane or Parker, which way do I go here? And that was you kind of putting a worm in people's ear to think about which approach resonates with me. Where did this come from?
It's just, I could say teaching for years, but I think some people um, I think maybe I have, I mean, I may not have, I would have answered it maybe differently like 35 or 40 years ago, but I think is that some people just have ability to put themselves in somebody else's shoes, you know? And I didn't realize at the time, but actually see like where they were coming from because when I was younger, I had struggles learning things. And one other thing, and the reason I'm answering that now is that over the years, I realized that if I taught somebody how I learned how to play, right, that might be great. But I learned over the years that I might have to learn uh, 5 or 10 different ways to teach the same subject.
Yes.
So I only by reflecting on it years later that I realized that's what I did. That I would learn more than one approach to something. And so to answer to your question, there is. I was always, and it could have also, no, when I'm saying this, it could also be all those horn players and people that I knew, met from New Orleans that, because New Orleans is where everybody somehow listens to all the greats and then they kind of create their own style. You know what I'm saying? Is so all those horn players and all the famous musicians from New Orleans hung out with all the others, but you never, I mean, here's the thing. You never heard like a trumpet player come from New Orleans like 50 years ago. He sounds just like Louis Armstrong. No. And you know through Wynton Marsalis when he talks about this, but they're always trying to kind of create their own things so they don't get attached to, and I think maybe I'm trying to get to your exact point, but yeah, they don't get attached to the one thing. They allow the other person to make a choice for where they want to go and how it feels to them. So instead of saying, do this, somebody plays something and then you go, how did that feel? Or in this case, that worm that you mentioned in there. So yeah, that's kind of the approach and I think it becomes organic because everybody's doing it in New Orleans. No one's showing up and they're a clone. I mean, maybe in rock, some guys were a clone of certain people, but no one's like a clone of another guy. They like get the stuff down and then they move on. So I think it's part of that originality and giving somebody a choice because in the end, that's what they have to do anyway.
You know, the thing that I think about with all of this, and I want you to address this because one of the interesting things when I went to GIT, I saw people for the first time. My buddy Tim Lurch, who was in our class, or
Oh, Timmy's
Bart Simolis, right?
great.
Ed Finn, all of these guys were monsters, and I consider those guys friends and mentors. But what was interesting is that Tim was really, really into jazz and played chord melody beautifully. You know, my buddy Ed Finn and I had both been doing 6 night-a-week gigs and
Oh,
could play
Ed,
pretty much
yeah.
whatever. I had perfect pitch, he had perfect relative pitch. So we used to try and drive one another crazy
Oh,
about
that's
that from time to
awesome.
time, which was interesting.
Fantastic. Yeah.
You know, and Bart Simolis, what a tremendous reader. And I
Ah,
think
Bart,
about
all of them. Yeah,
yeah,
that's right.
I think about that class. I was lucky to just be in on the jet stream to ride in with that. But what was interesting is that we had people there that had only played one kind of thing. And your upbringing in New Orleans, and I have not played New Orleans, but I do know that you can't help but kind of be caught up in all of that, and you end up listening to music. Worked with a keyboard player in a band called the Fabulous Shades back in the late 80s with a guy named Phil Masrick, who loved New Orleans style playing, and he could play that very authentically. And all he ever listened to was Meters and everybody from New Orleans.
Dr. John and all
Yeah,
those.
absolutely. And affected all of the things that he did because that was the lens through which he filtered things. And I think probably one of the reasons why with your playing particularly, you're able to do all these different kinds of things is because you were hearing horn players. You weren't just listening to guitar players. People that only listen to Metallica are probably only going to sound like people that listen to Metallica. And somebody that only listens to or plays, Brent Mason licks from Nashville. That's pretty much their thing. And to me, I think it's really important to be able to have a wider palette to draw from. And I think that's something that you and Ronnie, and for, again, for those people that had not had the opportunity to attend GIT during that time, Ronnie would teach chord melody and also the classical stuff. And Les was the bebop master. In fact, one of your many books, and we'll get into books probably on the second part of this because you've written so many books, you were the guy for jazz and bebop guitar. And I think what was interesting is that, again, you had all of this stuff by the time you went to California, and we can head about there now, but you had a laundry list of musical experiences to draw on, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, in the beginning in New Orleans, I played acoustic music, I played blues, rock, all kinds of different
And
things.
I've heard you play that and you kill on that.
Yeah, and then I slowly got into the jazz thing. But by the time I got to GIT, what happened was is I made a move because when I was younger, in fact, actually, there was a Dixieland bass player that told me, he goes, you should listen to this guy, Howard Roberts. And I'd never heard Howard Roberts. So in the end, after a while, towards the end, before I moved to LA, I was listening to Howard Roberts and all the West Coast guys. And I didn't want to move to New York and freeze to death. So you had a choice. So by the time I got to LA and then GIT, it started a few years later, then that's the style. And the styles kind of call you. And so after a while, it's not like you play jazz, you kind of live it. But the good thing in New Orleans, to your point, is that New Orleans, there's this blues and rock and funk and Dixieland and some real jazz. I mean, not real jazz, but what people consider the mainstream jazz. We're all living together side by side. And the other
Yes.
thing too is, because you've played so many years, you have so much experience, but I could be playing in a club and then I go, let's go get in the car and another friend of ours is playing like 5 miles away. In New Orleans, all you do is walk out the club, walk two doors down, there's another band playing, go up the street, there's four more bands playing, you go around the corner, and so we had the experience of not having to go anywhere because people would come. And the other point is, musicians, tons of musicians came to New Orleans. I remember one time, guy comes up to me, goes, Lester is this guitar player. He looks really weird. He's got like really weird eyes and his skin's all white and all that stuff. And they're playing this like, I've never heard rock like this. That was like Edgar Winters, and then Baxter from the shoot, I forgot the band, but he used to come to New Orleans all
Jeff Baxter?
yeah, Jeff
Yeah.
Baxter would come all the time and be jamming. So they go, Les, you want to jam with this guitar player? And so we always had those guys and all the horn and Ray Charles. I mean, it was just everybody came there at some point, so you could just go hear it. And so yeah, it's so. But back to your point though of yeah, you just have all these different styles, and they all live together. It's like and the other thing too, more from an economic standpoint, right, is that if you were younger and you told your parents, look, imagine this, I'm going to be a musician. Okay. So first your parents go, shit, you're not doing that. You're going to college. But in New Orleans, if you tell your parents you're going to be a musician, they go, oh, okay, fine. Because they know people that have made it. And then that's the same thing too. If somebody says, I want to be a chef, now it's so popular, but back in the day, I want to be a chef. They go, okay, fine, no problem. And so your parents knew that people had succeeded at all those occupations, and so there
Yes.
was never any question of that. So I think it's a combination of all those styles living together, and crossing each other, overlapping, I think is the word. But yeah,
Absolutely.
so
Absolutely.
that
I think the other thing which is really interesting to keep in mind for folks that have not ever been to New Orleans is very much its own thing.
it
It's a
is.
very different city from really any other place in the world. But, even today, I believe that it probably functions more like a 24/7, 365 resort area,
Yeah,
probably not unlike the Florida Keys maybe do, perhaps Atlantic City at times of the year, certainly Las Vegas, in that there is entertainment going on at all times
always.
because in its own way, New Orleans is a city that never sleeps.
Exactly. Yeah, they do.
So anyway, so what precipitated the move to California and start working at GIT with Howard?
Well, what happened was is that I wanted to go to California anyway. And so Hank Mackey and us and Ronnie and all that. In fact, actually the strange thing is that Ron Eschday, uh, Hank Mackey and myself, right, is that after a while we identified so much with the LA players that I was Joe Pass, Ronnie's Howard Roberts, and Hank Mackey was Marty Kessel. So they would call me JP and the other. But so I wanted to go to California and be part of that, partly the studio scene and all the other stuff. And so that's what precipitated me going there and really wanting to go there. And then Ronnie wanted to go there, and Ronnie did. He actually went before me because he went out there before. He went out there about 2.5 years before I did, and I wanted to go out there. So that's what happened. Then after I was out there, I was working all the time and doing stuff. And then what happened was they formed GIT with Ronnie, Joe, and Don. And then what happened is that they had another teacher, Jackie King,
Yes.
and he's a left-handed guitar player, really good. He has perfect pitch, and he played with like Willie Nelson and everything.
Yeah.
He's like a really and plays nylon string guitar too, but he left, and so they needed to add the fourth teacher. So at the time Keith Wyatt was a student, Howard Alden's a student.
Yes.
So then I put it. I ended up being that fourth one that joined the group, and Ronnie asked me first to do a workshop at MI, which I did. And in that workshop, I think I'm not Howard Alden, but I think it was Steve Travato, Jennifer
Yeah.
Batten, Jamie Finley. Uh, they were all in that group, and a whole bunch of others that actually Albanon. It goes on and on. But those guys, I did the workshop, and then they went, "You got to get this guy." And so I was lucky for that. And so that's how I. And so then then I went permanent in '79.
Okay, great, great. Because by the time I was there, you had been there for a while. And in fact, the other thing that I'll mention, because of the way, again, most people never had a chance to go there, but the first 6 months of the year, you did the basic stuff, basic harmony, basic theory, sight reading, single string, rock and roll and blues and stuff. We couldn't get to the primo instructors like a Les Wise until we'd been there the first 6 months because the attrition was incredible. I have a picture over here on my wall above this pick, and it's me at graduation, played with Mark Von Zek on bass, who won the best bassist of the year, Michael Hurwitz, who ended up getting a Yamaha drum endorsement and played with everybody. Bart Simolis is in that picture, but he's out of the frame playing keyboards on a song I wrote for my wife called Angelica. And it was interesting because that whole experience, we didn't get to work with people like yourself until the last 6 months. And I think that probably was intelligent because we had 350 guitar players, bass players, and drummers that started on April 1st, 1983.
I
And that
know.
picture, March 17th, 1984, less than 80 made it.
Yeah, yeah, no,
So
there's a
the
lot.
attrition at first 5 or 6 years was incredible. And all of the guys that I mentioned, Ed Finn stayed on and taught there. Bart Simolis has had a
Yeah,
great career in the
yeah, yeah,
studios.
yeah.
Tim Lurch is on True Fire and does his own thing. And I was fortunate to be part of all of that. But I want to talk about something. We can go ahead and get onto this right now. I want to talk about books because I remember talking with you in a class where you were talking about teaching, and that started something back here for me. I've taught for guitar for 40 years, and you were a big influence on that. I ended up writing a book called Guitar Made Simpler, An
Yeah, which
Intelligent
is
Approach.
great. That's great.
That's a book that was aimed at basically bringing GIT to somebody that had never put a pick to a string. And so what I wanted to talk about books and what got you into writing and when all of that began. What was the first title that you did?
Well, what happened was I think it was I don't know if it was the Bebop Bible or something else, but
I was going to say, I thought that was among the first ones, right?
yeah, it was among the first ones. But what happened was is that Howard Roberts had a publishing company.
Playback.
Yeah, he had playback music, and then Don had entered. Actually, before that, and then Don was with REH Publications, Roger Hutchinson.
Yes.
Okay, so in
Good
any
friend of
case,
ours.
what happened? I see Don. They were doing those little books for REH, where there were 3 or 4 pages or 10. Dave Easterly too, all those guys, right? And then Howard Roberts had the stuff, and I went, shit, everybody's doing books. I need to do a book. So I went up to Don. I go, Don, I want to write a book or something. Oh, yeah, sure, we can make that happen. And so I don't know if he was going to talk to Howard, or maybe even Howard Roberts said, yeah, you can do a book with this. And then Don goes, well, why don't you do something with Roger Hutchinson, which is REH, right? Well, two things happened. One, I talked to Roger Hudson, and we end up becoming best friends for years. So I would fly up. I brought him Frank Gambale. I brought him a whole bunch of people. Not that it was any hard thing to do that, but I started. But any case, so I started doing the thing for Roger, and I wrote books, and I would advise him on stuff and all that. So that's how I got into writing the book part. Where. Mainly because other people were doing it, and I thought, well, this is a good idea. And Ted Green had done the other books
Sure, sure.
before Chemistry First, and all the other stuff.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
but in any case, that's kind of how that happened. Then eventually there was a whole thing of publishers, right? There's Howard's books. There's uh, uh,
Roger Hutchinson.
Kay had her own company,
Yeah,
One Publishing, because it
yeah,
was her daughter.
yeah,
So that's where where the daughter is, and then Dale Zdenek,
yes,
the Dale Zdenek book, because then he did the jazz improvisation books for Ted Green, right? And then,
yeah.
and then Ronnie did the stuff with that, and there was a couple of others with Ernie Ball. But yeah, so in any case, that's just kind of how it had happened, because the thing with the curriculum with GIT, we had all this stuff, but now you talk about the attrition, right?
Yeah. Pause right there for a second because we're going to have to get into this in volume 2. You've been listening to the Band of One podcast. I'm Riley Wilson with my special guest, Les Wise.